by Generals Crook, Terry, and Gibbon, were under surveillance by Sioux and Cheyenne warriors. General Terry's army, which included George Armstrong Custer's 7th United States Cavalry, might have been watched from the day it left Fort Abraham Lincoln in Dakota Territory. 1 month later, on the Little Bighorn, the sun went down as a red ball. That night, the valley was scored by intermittent flashes of heat lightning, which illuminated the tribes camped in 6 circles: Cheyenne, Sans-Arc, Miniconjou, Oglala, Blackfeet, Hunkpapa. Even in darkness, the pattern of the great village could be distinguished by the light of thousands of campfires. Larger fires were not victory bonfires, but the cremation towers of dead Sioux warriors. Only one thing is certain. Later the next day, the lodges were packed on travois, and the brightly colored horde began to move. Major Marcus Reno's officers studied this movement through field glasses. All of the tribes were flowing southward with savage dignity toward the Bighorn Mountains. Thousands of ponies and travois poles lifted a vast cloud of dust. Major Reno said, "The length of the column was equal to that of a large division of the Army of the Potomac." Captain Frederick Benteen estimated it at 3 miles long and half a mile wide. One trooper recalled many years later, "The dust seemed to lift for a few moments, and there in the valley below, we caught glimpses of thousands of Sioux and Cheyenne on foot and horseback, with their pony herds, dogs and pack animals, and all the trappings of a great camp, slowly moving southward." It was like some biblical exodus, the Israelites moving into Egypt, a mighty civilization on the march. Major Reno sent a message to General Terry. "I have had a most terrific engagement with hostile Indians. I have not seen or heard from Custer." Later, an ominous dust cloud approaching from the north turned out to be soldiers led by Terry and General Gibbon. Upon their arrival, Reno asked Gibbon, "Where is Custer?" Gibbon answered, "I don't know, but I suppose he was killed, for we counted 197 bodies on the ridge. I think no one escaped." Benteen asked the same question of General Terry. Terry replied, "To the best of my knowledge and belief, he lies on this ridge about 4 miles from here, with all of his command killed." Benteen said, "I can hardly believe it. At the Battle of Washita, he went off and left part of his command. I think he's somewhere down the Bighorn grazing his horse." Terry answered that he was mistaken. He told Benteen to go look. Benteen returned from this trip very pale and disturbed. An officer who accompanied him reported that after brushing dirt from Custer's face, they stood looking down at the general's body. Benteen said, "There he is! Damn him! He will never fight again." By 1848, California was part of the young American nation. The Great Plains dividing the states could no longer be ignored. With the 1849 gold rush came more palefaces than the Native Americans could imagine, bringing alcohol, guns, cholera, smallpox. The tribes grew increasingly resistant. Even the monstrous buffalo herds tried to avoid this white plague. In 1857, a council of Plains Indians met with United States politicians. The council had been designed by the Americans to induce the natives to settle in specific places and to stop wandering as they had for centuries. Chief Joseph's comment on white logic summarizes the response of most Native Americans. One might as well expect rivers to run backwards as expect free people to live in a coop. He asked, who had authorized white men to keep Indians in one place, while the whites might travel as they pleased? To such an extraordinary question, of course, there could be no answer. Custer saved a telegram from General Sherman, which says, "We must act with vindictive earnestness against the tribes to the extermination of men, women, and children." He was ordered to move against Chief Black Kettle's Cheyenne wintering along the Washita River. An attack on this same village years earlier had some 3rd Cavalry soldiers scalping dead Native American women. An Indian boy, hiding under a collapsed teepee, witnessed these mutilations. What effect this might have had on young Curly, later known as Crazy Horse, can only be imagined. What effect seeing these mutilations might have had on young Curly, later known as Crazy Horse, can only be imagined. Custer left Camp Supply on November 23rd, 1868, with 574 troopers, a mule train and mule packers, 37 supply wagons, and a 16-piece band mounted on white horses. The 7th Cavalry attacked Black Kettle's Cheyenne early one freezing winter morning. Custer decided to surround the village by splitting the regiment, just as he would do 8 years later at the Little Bighorn. In her memoirs, Custer's wife Elizabeth wrote, "Excitement kept the men warm, and when the band struck up Gary Owen, the soldiers' hearts were bursting with enthusiasm and joy at the glory that awaited them." fight in the village lasted only a few minutes. A New York Tribune story compared the devastated camp to a slaughter pen, littered with the bodies of native warriors, women, children, old men, lying one on top of another. This was Custer's only victory on the plains. It enraged and disheartened not only the Cheyenne, but all of the plains tribes. At his court of inquiry on January 13th, 1879, Major Marcus Reno was asked about his relationship with Custer. He answered, "Well, sir, I had known Custer for a long time, and I had no confidence in his ability as a soldier." Reno graduated from West Point in 1857, 20th in a class of 38. Not good, but better than Custer. Class of 1861, last. Custer himself observed that his days at the academy might be studied by future cadets as an example to be avoided. Reno's record was also superior to that of his closest friend, James McNeill Whistler, who piled up demerits and concluded one examination by defining silicon as a gas. Some years later, Whistler said that if indeed silicon had been a gas, he would have stayed in the army and become a major general. Reno said yes, but then nobody would ever have heard of his mother. Reno was described as a short, stout man with a temper. And unlike his statement about Whistler's mother, no evidence of a sense of humor. His Native American scouts compressed his personality and his appearance into a single phrase: man with the dark face. Toward the end of 1875, the Native American unrest led the War Department to send 3 armies to chastise the tribes. General Crook would move north from Wyoming. General Gibbon would move east from Montana. General Terry, with Custer in command of the 7th Cavalry, will move west from Dakota Territory. Fort Abraham Lincoln, Dakota Territory, May 17th, 1876. General Terry ordered the 7th Cavalry to circle the parade ground. Wives looked on with apprehension, but the children tied handkerchiefs to sticks and beat on tin pans, marching joyously beside their fathers. Custer left Fort Lincoln with 566 troops, 35 scouts, 31 officers, a mule train with a dozen mule packers, 3 50 caliber Gatling guns, and a 16-piece band mounted on white horses. As the column rode away, a strange meteorological phenomenon caused its reflection to appear in the sky, a ghostly double of the flesh and blood men. A feeling of impending disaster begins to charge the air. Electric clouds sizzle above, while Custer's musicians on white horses play old favorites. Calamity Jane herself trailed the regiment, dressed in male clothing, covered with lice. On the night before the battle, June 24th, after the officers had met in Custer's tent for their orders, some remained to sing softly. Annie Laurie. Little footsteps, soft and gentle. The goodbye at the door. The doxology. That night, Sioux tom-toms echoed through the Little Bighorn Valley. Otherwise, it was quiet, except for the cottonwood trees rustling in the breeze, and a swishing sound from the river. Early the next morning, ominous signs continued to punctuate the cavalry's journey along the ridge above the river. The grounds where Indians had held the Sundance, with a pictograph left in the sand showing Sitting Bull's dream that soldiers would fall and be killed. Around noon, field trumpets blared. The Cheyenne warrior chief Tulmoon said, "We circled around them like water swirling around a stone." A Blackfoot named Kill Eagle said that when the Indians splashed across the Little Bighorn, they went like bees swarming from a hive. All he could hear was gunfire and the shrill eagle-bone whistles of the Sioux. Scenes of horror alternate with moments of intense beauty. One chief rode naked to the waist, wearing a bonnet with so many feathers they swept the earth. For Custer's troops locked inside a twisting circle of braves, it could have ended no other way, because the Great Spirit rode with these Indians. Chief Gull himself saw the Great Spirit riding on a coal-black pony. After the battle, many native warriors wore clothing stripped from the bodies of slain 7th Cavalry troopers. Little bells dangling from the bridles of their horses tinkled musically. News of the disaster reached Elizabeth Custer's hometown of Monroe, Michigan. A neighbor recalled, "I was sitting upstairs by the window, and I saw my father coming up the street, his coat off, his vest off, his hat in his hand, waving a newspaper. I ran downstairs, for I knew something awful had happened. There he stood, white and chalky, with the paper shaking in his hands. General Custer's entire brigade has been wiped out," he gasped. "They're all gone." A great silence came over Monroe. Then all the bells began to toll. Church bells, firehouse bells, every bell in the town. To this day, I never hear a bell that it does not bring back the memory. Tribal leaders had talked about what to do if the Little Bighorn camp was threatened. Their decision was to wait and see how the soldiers behaved. If Custer had come and talked with us, we would have surrendered and gone with him. This was confirmed years later. General H.L. Scott observed that such a method of dealing with the Native Americans had not occurred to anybody. When asked why the 7th Cavalry had been defeated, Captain Benteen said, "We were at their hearths and homes. Their medicine was working well, and they were fighting for all the good God gives anyone to fight for." They could not understand why the soldiers pursued them, when all they wanted was to be left alone to live as they had for centuries, hunting, fishing, trailing the buffalo. They did not see how the land could be divided, allotted, owned. They thought the earth was created for everyone. They could not understand why the soldiers pursued them when all they wanted was to be left alone. They did not see how the land could be divided, allotted, owned. They thought the earth was created for everyone. In 1927, a Cheyenne woman told about the battle. When she was a girl, she had lived in Black Kettle's village on the Washita River. Early one morning, cavalry soldiers led by General Custer attacked. She ran barefoot over the snow to escape being killed. The next spring, Custer returned. He smoked a peace pipe and said he would not fight anymore. The chiefs told him that if he broke his promise, he would surely be killed. The Cheyenne women thought he was handsome and saw him often. Many years later, on the day of the Little Bighorn battle, she was frightened and tried to hide. She ran through the camp toward the Cheyenne Circle more than a mile downstream. She ran by young men painting themselves for war. She saw a woman screaming, jumping up and down because she could not find her child. She saw her nephew ride away, dressed for battle. Across the river, she might have seen Custer. Because of the dust and smoke from the fighting, she couldn't be sure. After the battle ended, she asked her brother for a pony so she could cross the river to look for her nephew. She rode her pony among the bodies and saw two women she had known in Black Kettle's village. They said they had found the handsome soldier from the Washita. They had found Custer's body. The two women had punctured his eardrums with a sewing awl. They did this to improve his hearing, because he had not been able to hear what he was told by the chiefs when he smoked a peace pipe and promised to never fight again. She ended her story. Through 50 years, many a time I have thought of Custer as the handsome soldier I saw when I was a girl. And I have often wondered if, when I was riding among the dead where he was lying, my pony might have kicked dirt upon his body. And I have often wondered if, when I was riding among the dead where he was lying, I wonder if my pony might have